My husband and I moved up to Northern California because the situation for ag in Southern California was not very good anymore, particularly in Orange County, where the ranch was, because it was being so developed and you get surrounded by housing and retail and whatnot, and you can't live with that tax base very well as a farmer. So the best thing to do is to go find someplace where you can, which is why we came here to Northern California. But we moved up here just 6 months after we got married. So, I mean, we were children, honestly, and on our own, to make it work. So the process was kind of interesting because there were obviously more than one option for us, but my father-in-law interviewed all the tax assessors in different counties. So he interviewed the tax assessor in Glenn County and Colusa County and Butte County and thought Colusa County was a better choice. When we first came here to Colusa County, and the first time we drove out here to this property that I had actually seen it, there was nothing here. I mean, there were no houses. There was a barn and a shop, and I believe the Grange was leasing it at the time, so it was just all pasture land, or you could dry land farm, either barley or alfalfa, and that was the sum and total of what you could do on this property until the canal came through. Dry land farming, an explanation of that would be you have no irrigation at all. You don't have a well, you have nothing. So you plant your crop hoping that you will get enough rain to sustain it through to harvest. So you were really at the whim and whimsy of nature, and it could either be really good or really bad. But back in that time, we always seemed to get a pretty good amount of rainfall. Then to show the difference between the canal situation that we have now and that dry land farming, where you were so limited, a group of men from Colusa County decided they would approach the federal government about a canal system that would go through the west side of Glenn and County and Colusa County and down to Dunnigan to open up the possibilities here on the west side so that the options of crops to grow were better, the money for the crop was better, so it improved life all up and down any scale you want to use to measure it with. And they started that in the early 70s. We had the groundbreaking kind of celebration of our part of the canal here that goes through the ranch and is part of 4M Water District in 1979. And I believe we got our first water either late that year or in the spring of 1980. Immediately, there was, we stopped the dryland farming, and we began to develop what we would consider the irrigable acreage, which is also part of a Bureau of Reclamation decision about what is farmable and irrigatable as opposed to not. So immediately, things changed, and it wasn't that it was trees right away. That didn't happen until about 1995. But it was alfalfa. It was row crops. You could lease your ground out, and the farmers that were growing row crops would want to lease it, or vine seed people, like Seeds by Design, that kind of thing. And they would, lease little pieces of acreage for that. And then we just, by 1995, I think that was the very year we put in our first little chunk of trees. So it changed a lot fairly fast. If you consider 1980, you got water, and by 1995, you had evolved into orchards. The Bureau of Reclamation does have quite a bit of control over what you can grow through, I think the biggest vehicle is the rate they charge. Because the more they charge for water, the more you're searching for a crop that can cover the cost of that water. I mean, you can't plant alfalfa and irrigate it and put your whole ranch into alfalfa and figure that you're going to be able to afford the water to grow the alfalfa. That's not the way it works. So then you look for a higher income crop that can help pay for that water that you're getting from the Bureau. And so then you go to things like trees, because it's more sustainable for you as far as income is concerned and the expense related. The Bureau of Reclamation also has a process by which they assess what you're growing on a 5-year average, and it usually happened on the contract renewal years. And so we would go through the sustainability reports and all that kind of thing and try to show that while they thought that the almonds were just doing wonderfully well and we had more than enough money to pay an extra fee for water, they were not yet producing. So, it takes about 5 years or so before a tree will actually start giving you money back. So, it's so that pushed some people away from trees, back to rice. So any movement that the Bureau makes or decision they make moves a farmer in a certain direction. These crops that we've been talking about are commodities, and they are sold on an open market. I know that people do talk about the fact that you should, well, why don't you raise your prices or set it higher? We don't have any control over the market. No farmer has any control unless they have some sort of a monopoly on a crop, which would be rather tough to do. So you are the victim of the market just as you are of Mother Nature. And it's unpredictable. A lot of it depends on international politics, exactly what you're going to get for your crop. So you just have to, farmers are the biggest gamblers, bigger than people that go to Las Vegas every weekend, because they're filled with drive and work ethic and the determination to succeed. And they're willing to take tremendous risk to get there. My husband and I supported, and I still support Sites Reservoir because it's going to be so important for all of Northern California to have extra storage. I mean, look where we are right now. And as I understand it, Sites is designed to make some of those really bad years a little bit better. Also help the environment along the way. I mean, I know that it's not part of the system that we're talking about, but right now in the Klamath, with water shut off to farmers and fish are dying and all these environmental increases, and success that they are all being undone. And it's because there's not enough water. So it's important to everyone, the environment, farmers, communities. Family Water Alliance is very near and dear to my heart, as you know. And Family Water Alliance originated when the Bureau of Reclamation was going to cut off water to water districts who didn't have proper fish screening, or, the fish kill was too high or whatever. And they kind of clamped down on Colusa Irrigation District, which at the time was the biggest irrigation district in Colusa and Glenn County. A lot of farmers had their livelihoods at stake. I mean, it was a tremendous issue. So we just had sort of a ragtag band of us get together to see what we could do about it. And the more we worked on things like that, the more structured we became. We were pretty successful in many things that we did and still are. So I'm just very proud to have been a part of the beginning of Family Water Alliance. The Family Water Alliance Fish Screen program was an innovative thing. Nobody else had done it yet. But as we sat and watched it, we didn't really know much about fish screens, but we did know that if farmers didn't screen and we didn't get them help with the cost, they were going to suffer. So it was a farm-based idea that moved us forward on that. We wanted to keep farmers in business. We wanted to help them cover the cost of the pumps. And that's, generally speaking, what happened and still goes on today. And I think from what I'm hearing, it's gotten quite a bit larger. when Family Water Alliance first formed, it was 1990, 1991, we didn't have a kind of formal base like most organizations do, where you have a membership fee and, you have meetings once a month or whatever. We just developed what I called fans, because the work we were doing was good and people liked it and they didn't mind donating. And we would invoice twice a year, and that kept us in enough money to keep going. And go we did, because we took long rides around all of Northern California while we were promoting our grocery bag program, which was we would go to a grocery store or the headquarters of a grocery chain, and we would give them a pitch about farming and how important it was that people understand where their food came from. Because at that time, we were really interested in the fact that there was such a divide between farmers and people who lived in the city, urban dwellers. And we were going to try something to get the idea across to people that didn't live on a farm and weren't involved in production agriculture, that when they went into the store and bought these things, it came off someone's farm. So we developed a little grocery bag, and on one side it said food for thought, and on the other side it would have some fact or whatever about farming. And we really got into a lot of stores. Of course, locally we had no trouble at all, but we went all the way down to Modesto, to Save Mart, and it took a lot of hours, but it worked pretty well for a long time. And then, as things do, they kind of fade out, and then you try the next thing. We did a lot of speaking engagements to try and explain what we were doing, to emphasize again that divide between farmers and people who live in a large city, small city, whatever, hoping to kind of bring the two closer together. We worked with fishermen, some of them who had been historically very had a very negative look at agriculture. They weren't real happy most of the time with ag, and did not beat around the bush about it either. We worked with some environmental people that were also that way, but after we worked with these people for a little while, we softened them some. We didn't change them completely, but they understood better what we were talking about. One of our team, Joe Carancho, was always really good with the fishermen. And he would go over to the coast. He had friends over there that had businesses. Cato Brothers were great. They would donate to our annual dinner and they were to the auction, and they were always very supportive, and that was Joe. And we even put a great big sign over there on the coast in Fort Bragg, farmers and fishermen, working together. So we were going so many different ways. Then we also worked with California Forestry Association, and we had a very successful relationship there. I remember one time I went over to, I don't know if it was Eureka. You got the forestry was having a rally over there, and it was the first time that I had spoken in at any place where there were people who were demonstrating against you, So I was getting direction on what to do and what not to do, and what to recognize by word or glance. And there was this Nadine Bailey that got up on the truck ahead of me behind a redwood podium, which was gorgeous. And she did her usual lovely job. And I was next. And I got up there, and I was so short you couldn't see me behind the podium. So I had to step out on the side in a little bit of wind, clutching my papers. And of course, the whistles started blowing all around me, and I started looking at them. And then I think it was Don, and he hollered at me, no, just look straight ahead. Those were the wild and woolly days when we were out working. Forestry was out doing the same kind of thing. We were fighting all the endangered species that people were trying to protect, and they didn't care necessarily who went out of business or why, as long as the spotted owl had a place to go, even if it was a Walmart sign. So, it was stimulating and weary-making all at once. We have commodity boxes at our annual dinner, and they are ginormous. I mean, they're huge. And everybody around here, for I don't know how many countywide, everyone donates their commodity to these boxes, and people love them. I mean, it's amazing how huge they are. I mean, we started out, we had little baskets with a few things in it, and now, my gosh, you almost need a hand cart. They're that big, and they're brim full. So, and that brings some well-needed money into the organization as well. What we did as Family Water Alliance, and there were many of us. I mean, I've already mentioned Joe Carancho, but there were many that were willing to go and spend time, hours, trying to send this message. There were a few people around that didn't really appreciate what we were doing. I think in time they came to understand that it was a good and viable approach. Part of the approach that was different was that we had a lot of facts on our side. I mean, we were statistically correct. I mean, we knew what we were talking about, but we also brought emotion into the equation and made it more human. That this was happening to people. It wasn't just numbers. There were people that were suffering because of regulation or lack of water or whatever we were talking about at the time. There's always a human element, which was completely forgotten in any of the documents that were written up for the Endangered Species Act or whatever. You couldn't, in fact, I think at one time, you could not consider the economic repercussions from any of the regulations because that was one of the things we were trying to change so that it would be a more honest evaluation of what the regulation would do. We went everywhere with that message. We spoke in front of a congressional committee. I traveled up to Klamath Falls because they were having a sort of a congressional committee testimony there. And the reaction that we used to get out of the crowd when we would actually bring them into the middle of the thing talking about people was spectacular. I mean, it was all of a sudden like they had never heard anything like that before. Nobody really thought about what it did to them. Certainly not at the higher echelons of government anyway. So yeah, it was very different and I think kind of off-putting. I mean, to be perfectly honest, and this has been very positive so far, but I did have gentlemen in particular that would come to me and say, you're doing this the wrong way. You are too emotional. You can't, you're going to ruin it for everyone. You cannot do that. But we didn't change, and it turned out fairly well. Being a woman in ag is different, for sure. Being a woman in ag with a cause is even harder. I mean, Sue and I ran our nose up against tough people all the time. The guys, not so much, because for some reason, if a man's saying it to you, then well, he must be right. But if it's a woman and she's passionate about it, and they don't take it right at first. They really don't, and it makes it difficult. I mean, I was at a meeting with some local people that I kind of know. And there was a forum that was being formed for along the Sacramento River that was basically going to take over the running of the river. And, their plan was a very thick pamphlet full of stuff. And we would go around with this and we would point out the irregularities, the things that didn't make any sense, the things that we didn't think would work, to try and get it Well, the impact's reduced. And, I mean, I had men just say, well, you just have to be lying. And no, I said, read it. It's right there. But that's the kind of thing you'd run into. Or you're too emotional, that I mentioned to you before. You're going about this the wrong way. You're bringing too much emotion into it. And the funny part is that Michael Jackson, later, who, he's a fairly well-known environmental activist, he made the comment that Sue and I were the first people to actually bring that to the table, and that people didn't realize how effective it actually was. So he gave us a little bit of a kudos, and so I was pleased by that. Not too long ago, let's see, 2 years now, I think, but actually longer than that, maybe 4, when WAPA and SMUD formed a partnership, and they were going to, it was called the COSU line, Colusa and Sutter counties, and they wanted to put another power line, which coincidentally happened to be on my ranch, to create more renewable energy. Well, I knew that this ranch would lose a ton of value if this happened, so that was one reason to fight. Secondly, you get tired of being run over. And again, back to the human cost, that's very often not considered. So I got together with a neighbor and Family Water Alliance, and we began to reach out, as we do when we get in, to fight this. The end result was that we won. WAPA had to go away, and SMUD also, and leave us alone. And I can't tell you how rewarding that was the day I learned that they were canceling the project. I mean, it was one of the better things that have ever happened. And it was absolutely unexpected, because when I was out looking for financial support to put on this fight, I got a lot of resistance, because people didn't think it was worth the cost of investing in what I was trying to do, because it was impossible. Couldn't be done. Well, I think people just forgot about Family Water Alliance and how strong that organization is, and how stubborn I can be. So, between that small group of us from Sutter County and Colusa County, and with Family Water Alliance, we won that fight huge. It is correct that while we were fighting this power line, we were not against the cities getting more power, or California figuring out what kind of energy they needed, what they could use. What we were tired of was being the path of least resistance, where they could go and have no protest from anyone, because there were not enough of us. We were too spread out. They probably thought we couldn't organize, and oftentimes that's true, because sometimes getting farmers together is a little bit like herding cats. I mean, it's not easy. So there were other options that were available for the power line that we fought against. Now, some of them happened to go through cities, and that is exactly why it ended up as the plan was here in property in Colusa County, and going clear over through Sutter, instead of a shorter route, a less expensive solution, which would have gone through cities that were more populated, and therefore there would probably be more people to object. I know that as we were talking today, that the Klamath Basin area is in a lot of trouble. There's no water for farming. They've cut it off completely. Fish are dying too. I know that there are tribes involved. There are farmers involved. There's always the federal government involved. I'm not sure that I know that Water for Life is pretty active up there. I don't know how strong they still are. But if one thing I would have to say is, never think that something can't be done. And in order to make it possible, you have to stick together, you have to organize, you have to have your your point of view clearly stated so that everyone can repeat the same thing, and your message has to be clear, and it can't be hateful. So, yeah, I don't know what they're going to do. I just think it bodes awfully badly for all the rest of us, because this will come right down the line to us. Not that it isn't bad enough here right now as it is. I mean, we just got, we had a 5% allocation for this year. And then after the year had started, and we're into May, they took it away. So all the planning everyone did in the early spring to make sure that they had purchased enough water, was based on how much they were getting from the Bureau of Reclamation. And so then the Bureau pulled the rug. So now we're just, everyone's just walking around with their fingers crossed. This kind of policy makes it very difficult. The Bureau of Reclamation, when they pull your water so late in the season, because May is late in the season. I mean, you're planning in the wintertime exactly, if you don't have a permanent crop, you're planning on what you're going to plant in the spring, for what purpose, maybe it's for vine seeds, maybe it's a row crop, maybe it's alfalfa, maybe it's permanent pasture. But the planning has already been done, and the expense has already been in the books, and you're out the money, and you need the crop, and that's how you pay for these things. And then you don't have the water to sustain your investment. Pretty drastic. The job of groups like Family Water Alliance, and particularly Family Water Alliance, because we had sort of a new approach, is to explain, demonstrate what is in these plans that people keep hearing about, so that they'll be well informed, they'll know what's going to happen, and then if they want to object, they know enough to object. And it doesn't happen, and then, a lot of times something will pass, and then the hue and cry will go up, and oh my God, we had no idea that that's what this was all about, and what do we do now? And of course, it's too late. So the time to do it is before the law or the ordinance or the regulation or whatever is passed. On April 5th, 2019, I lost my partner, Deke. And I so wanted to have something to really remember him with. So in the process of doing all the things you do after an event like that, and you sort and you do everything, I realized that I couldn't just throw things away. It just wasn't going to happen. And so I decided to take his favorite shirts and hats and ties and have this quilt made for him. So he's always kind of here with me, and it sits in his recliner where he would have been were he here. That's exactly where he would be. And I have a grandson that comes over frequently, and he heads right for this chair, sits on the quilt, and puts on Papa's hat. So it's means a lot to me, and I'm so very glad I did it. All three of our boys had a great fondness for agriculture. Two boys are still here on the ranch. It's DJ and Wade, and actively involved in, especially since their fathers passed away. I mean, they've picked everything up and just run with it. Our middle son is involved in the family business, but it's not as ag-based, and it's down in Southern California. So it makes my heart sing that they are doing the things that Deke would want them to do. We have a big event here on the ranch that brings us all together, and we do it every year, and it's our annual branding, where the cowboys round up all the mamas and their babies, and they bring them into the corral, and the calves are processed, and I mean, it's hard work, and it takes quite a bit of organization, and especially to keep it safe for the people that are working in the corral. But after that, I show up with all the food. And so we all retire to the shop and the barbecue and, tri-tip and rice and beans and, oh my gosh, so much food. And horseshoe tournament, and everybody has a wonderful time. And even though the Cowboys started at 5 o'clock in the morning gathering, they're still there at 8 o'clock playing horseshoes. And 2 years ago, we had an entire family reunion there, and it was pretty remarkable. And it was fun to see the rest of our family talking to our neighbors and understanding more about what happens up here. So, yeah, it's a wonderful thing every year.